I want to tell you to divorce your husband. But as a doctor, I'm not in a position to say that. If I did, it could become a big problem.
Eh? What do you mean?
There's no one else here. So, this is just my monologue. I'm focused on organizing the supplies, so if anyone else were here, they might not notice, but you should be careful.
When I went to the hospital to hear the results of my stepson's examination, the doctor took me to a separate room and suddenly began muttering, claiming it was just a monologue. At first, I didn't understand why the doctor was doing this, but as I listened to the conversation, I was able to grasp the intention. The content was something I hadn't imagined. So, does that mean I need to directly caution my husband and persuade him to stop?
It's a situation that requires careful judgment. It might be best to separate the father and the child. So, I think divorce and having the mother take the child would be a good idea.
It seemed like the doctor and I were having a conversation, but it was merely us each voicing our monologues. If asked whether this way of communication was completely fine, it probably wasn't. The doctor was treading quite a gray area. Having heard the whole story and understood the situation, I bowed in gratitude towards the doctor's back and quietly left the room. After being married for 7 years, my husband had been continuously doing outrageous things. As the doctor suggested, it seemed necessary to separate my husband and son as soon as possible. I began to devise a plan to divorce my husband. I am Tina. I am 33 years old and work in an office. My husband, Tobias, is 2 years older and works in a restaurant. We married 2 years ago, and I haven't experienced childbirth yet. Therefore, I should be seriously considering having children at my age. However, both my husband and I think it might be better not to have children anymore. This doesn't mean we don't want children. We already have a 5-year-old son named Blue. Well then, take care of Blue.
Have a good day. Hey, Blue, aren't you going to say goodbye to Mom?
Goodbye. Good luck with work today.
As my son waved goodbye to me while scattering crumbs of toast on the table, and my husband busily wiped up the crumbs with a cloth, I always felt my heart warmed by this scene before heading to work. Even though we've been married for 2 years, the son is 5 years old because my husband is a divorced man, and the son is his child from a previous marriage. The son knows I am not his biological mother. However, both my son and I interact as if we are truly parent and child, so I've never been troubled by not being the biological parent. There are no issues with parenting. In the morning, my husband, who starts work later, takes the son to kindergarten, and in the evening, I pick him up after work. Additionally, my husband works on weekends, but I have weekends off, so there's no time when the son is left alone at home. Thanks to my husband's cooperation, parenting goes smoothly. However, there is just one thing that I personally find a bit problematic. Blue, which do you like better, my cooking or Dad's?
Dad.
When my son answered immediately with a beaming smile, I felt as if I had received a blow to the head and might freeze up. Since my husband has weekdays off, there are a few days a week when he cooks instead of me while I'm at work. I know it's unnecessary to compare and that I will just end up feeling defeated, but I can't help but ask my son about my cooking versus my husband's. I understand that my son means no harm, and since my husband works in a restaurant, it's inevitable that he might be better at cooking. Nevertheless, is it old-fashioned to feel that as a mother, I should not lose in cooking skills to the father? Well, since cooking is my personal issue, it doesn't matter much, But there is another issue concerning the son that I need to pay attention to. Again? Is everything okay?
Oh, it's just the usual mild case. I just took him to the hospital and got back home.
He's had an upset stomach from time to time. But there's no major illness, right? The symptoms aren't getting worse, are they?
Of course not. He always gets an upset stomach, and the doctor just says it's diarrhea as usual.
While I was working, I received a call from my husband who had the day off. When my husband calls during work, it's usually when the son is feeling unwell. Today, the son said he had a stomachache before going to kindergarten, so my husband took him to the hospital and reported that he had missed kindergarten. The son has a weak stomach and occasionally has diarrhea. However, it's not due to a major illness, and the frequency is once every few months, sometimes with a gap of about 6 months. My husband wasn't worried at all and laughed off my excessive worry as if it were a business report. Even if it's mild diarrhea, doesn't he care about the son? I wondered this but didn't say it aloud. It seems my husband does think about the son in his own way. My husband, thinking there might be a doctor who could stop the son's almost regular diarrhea, had been going from hospital to hospital and had visited all the nearby hospitals. But everywhere he went, the diagnosis was just diarrhea, and the doctors had said that as the son grows and becomes stronger, the diarrhea might stop. So, he settled on the current hospital. This flow might be why my husband doesn't worry much about the son. 5 years later, the son turned 10 years old. As my husband said, the son occasionally gets an upset stomach but hasn't developed a serious illness and has grown up healthy.
I'm home. Hurry up with lunch.
Don't rush so much. You just got back, right?
I have a promise to meet up right after lunch. Hurry up. We'll be late.
Okay. One Sunday, the son, who had been out since the morning, came home just to eat lunch. He seemed eager to finish lunch quickly and leave, sitting at the dining table and urging me like a desperate food fighter racing against the clock.
Thanks for the meal. I'm off.
After quickly shoveling the pasta I made into his stomach, the son tossed his fork onto the plate and rushed out of the house. Seeing my energetic son, I realized I had been worrying unnecessarily. However, I should have reflected and regretted that it was unnatural for my overly energetic son to regularly have an upset stomach. One day, I received a call from my husband while I was working. Since it was during work, I expected the usual content, but this time there was something different.
It seems this diarrhea is quite severe. He's been complaining of a lot of stomach pain.
Is it okay? Could there be a major illness detected?
No. It's not that bad. Usually, his stomach settles within a day, but this time, we've been told we need to observe him for a few days. You're still such a worrywart.
But the symptoms are worse than usual, right?
Even if it's worse, it's still just diarrhea. The doctor said it might be because it's winter and he's weakened by the cold.
I was laughed at by my husband again for worrying about the son's condition. Doesn't he worry even though the symptoms are worse than usual? I thought this, but today, my husband took time off from work to take the son to the hospital and stayed home from work. So it's not that he doesn't worry at all. Rather, I should be grateful for his response. Moreover, as my husband heard from the doctor, the son's condition improved in 2 days. It seemed my worry was once again unnecessary. However, 3 months later, the son's stomach issues flared up again.
It's nighttime. but he seems to be in a lot of pain, so I'll take him to the hospital.
At night and on weekends, it's always my responsibility to take him. On weekdays, I rely on you, so let me handle this. Today was a weekday, and my husband had the day off from work. The rule between us is that if my husband cooks dinner, I do the dishes. After dinner, and after I had started doing the dishes, the son complained of stomach issues again. It seemed a bit worse this time, similar to before. I put the son, who was walking bent over in pain, into the car and rushed to the hospital. But no matter how fast I went, what the doctor said would be the same as usual.
It's diarrhea. I'll give you the usual medicine.
Although I take the son to the hospital occasionally, the diagnosis is always the same. My husband, who takes the son to the hospital more often than I do, is probably tired of hearing it. It's understandable that my husband laughs at my worries about the son. However, this time, the doctor said something a bit different.
There's something concerning, so shall we do a more detailed examination today?
Hearing examination, my anxiety swelled like a balloon. Is my son suffering from some major illness after all?
This examination is to find out.
I couldn't refuse the doctor's recommendation for an examination. The son had to undergo blood tests, urine tests, and several other examinations.
You were late today. Did something happen?
Well, they did a more detailed examination than usual.
What were the results?
The results will be available later. I'll find out.
I'll go too.
You'll probably just say it's nothing serious again.
You don't trust me. Well, even if we do the examination, they'll just say it's the usual diarrhea. Isn't it just to make more money for the doctor?
Since he says such things, I wanted to hear the test results directly. Feeling tired from anxiety and worry, I decided to take a bath and go to bed. However, because my anxiety and worry had grown, I ended up falling asleep later than usual, even though I went to bed early. A few days later, when I received a call from the hospital saying the test results were ready, I took a day off from work and headed to the hospital alone. After completing the check-in, I waited in the waiting room. Despite my turn not being up yet, the doctor came over and spoke to me.
Could you come with me for a moment?
Sure. I was surprised that the doctor had come specifically to call me. My anxiety had swollen to the point of nearly bursting. The doctor led me silently down the hospital corridor to a room that looked like a storage room, different from the usual examination room. I braced myself by clenching my teeth, preparing not to faint if I was given terrible news.
You should get a divorce from your husband.
What do you mean? I had expected the doctor to discuss my son's illness, so the doctor's words took me by surprise, leaving me with a stunned expression. Unable to grasp the meaning of the doctor's words, I asked for clarification, but the doctor didn't answer. Instead, the doctor continued speaking matter-of-factly. As I listened, I began to understand the doctor's attitude and the meaning behind the words. I realized it might indeed be necessary to get a divorce quickly. However, preparation would be needed. I thanked the doctor, bowing to the back of the unresponsive figure, and quietly left the storage room. That evening, my husband asked me about the results of our son's tests.
You went to get the test results today, right? How were they?
Oh, nothing special. They said nothing was wrong.
I told you, didn't I? Nothing ever shows up in these tests.
I lied, exhaling the words. It seemed my husband believed me, so it looked like he would proceed with preparations for divorce. I first bought a surveillance camera used for caregiving and child monitoring and installed it on top of the cupboard in the kitchen. The camera was hidden behind empty boxes of cooking utensils. Although it might be considered an invasion of privacy, it apparently isn't illegal to record family members inside the house, as long as it's not done in a way that invades privacy. If it became illegal to install cameras inside the house, even installing security cameras would be prohibited. Moreover, being recorded without one's knowledge can be an invasion of privacy, even within a family. Evidence collected through illegal means might be unusable, but evidence gathered for legitimate reasons like infidelity or domestic violence is generally accepted. In this case, it should be acceptable. Even if my husband complained about privacy invasion, it would be a separate issue and wouldn't affect my objective. Having successfully hidden the camera from my husband, I knew it was only the beginning. Eat quickly. The dishes won't clean themselves.
Don't rush me. You've become quite impatient lately.
I just want to get done quickly so I can relax. Whether I or my husband had cooked dinner, washing the dishes was my responsibility. I moved the dishes used by the three of us to the sink, secretly collecting any leftover soup or sauce from my son's bowl and hiding it in the back of the freezer. Later, I stored more leftover food from my son and threw away the previous collection since it was no longer needed. I continued this seemingly pointless action persistently until the day arrived. My son would suffer again, but I hoped he could endure just one more time. 2 months after installing the camera and starting to collect leftover food, the day finally came. I took my son to the hospital, feeling guilty but resolved to confront my husband head-on to ensure my son's future safety. A few days later, having made the necessary preparations, I told my son to stay in his room and waited for my husband to come home.
I'm home. Ha! What's going on?
Just sit down. My husband entered the living room and slowly sat on the sofa, as if approaching a dog with its fangs pulled out. His cautious gaze seemed to be drawn to my serious expression and the various documents spread out on the table. However, since I was already prepared, any caution at this point was too late. You've been putting laxatives in Blue's food, haven't you?
Ha! What are you talking about?
My husband's gaze shifted to the empty upper left corner as soon as he heard my accusation. He must have realized that the evidence was already in place, so feigning ignorance was futile. Nevertheless, he pretended not to understand, likely because he didn't want to believe his actions had been discovered or was trying to buy time to think of a way to escape. Either way, giving him time to think was not advisable. I continued speaking, aiming to minimize any pause. I have footage of you putting laxatives in the food, and I've saved the laxative-laden soup in the freezer.
Footage? You used a camera? Even if, as you say, I did put something in Blue's food, a camera can't prove it's laxatives. And even if you have stored the soup with laxatives, how will you prove it's actually laxatives? Are you planning to take it to the police? The police won't act so easily. Are you going to bring the soup to the station and say it's laxative soup? They'll just think you're crazy. Even if the police get involved, it might only result in a warning for family trouble.
True, it might be hard for the police to act on my own, and if they do, it could end with a light outcome as you said. But what if the hospital cooperates?
What? The hospital?
You know Blue had tests at the hospital before, right? They confirmed the presence of laxative components in his system. We've been to all the nearby hospitals, and we've been going to the current hospital for a long time. The doctor thought it was strange that Blue had regular diarrhea despite no abnormalities, and suggested further tests. The doctor provided various insights.
What? So, the test results saying there was nothing wrong were a lie.
My husband was shocked to realize that his actions had been discovered 2 months prior. His gaze returned from the empty upper left corner to my face, and he looked surprised and slightly anxious, unsure of how I would confront him. I had first learned about my son's test results when the doctor took me to the storage room. That was when the plan began. The doctor, upon entering the storage room with me, turned his back to me as if ignoring me, and began organizing the neatly arranged supplies even further.
This area is restricted to authorized personnel, and there shouldn't be anyone else around, so I can focus on organizing supplies.
What do you mean, doctor?
I want to tell you that you should get a divorce from your husband, but as a doctor, I'm not in a position to say that. If I did, it would cause a major problem.
Eh? What do you mean?
No one else is here. So, this is just my monologue. Since I'm focusing on organizing supplies, I might not notice if someone else is around, so you need to be careful.
At first, I couldn't understand what the doctor was saying and asked for clarification. But the doctor didn't answer and indicated this was just a monologue, making it clear I should silently listen.
The laxative components were found in your son's system. He has regular stomach issues, so it's possible he's being given laxatives. I heard that your husband remarried 7 years ago, but there were reports of stomach issues before that, so the father seems more suspicious.
The doctor continued speaking calmly while organizing supplies that didn't seem necessary. Though I wondered if the doctor could have conveyed this information in a different room with nurses present, it became clear that the message was coming from here.
Your husband has taken your son to various hospitals and taken time off work to bring him to the hospital. If he's the one giving your son laxatives, why would he go through all this effort to bring him to the hospital? It could be Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This condition is said to be difficult for even doctors to notice, so often neither the person involved nor those around them realize it.
Munchausen syndrome by proxy?
Munchausen syndrome by proxy involves fabricating illness or injury to attract undue attention or sympathy from others, while Munchausen syndrome by proxy involves making someone else sick to gain attention. In this case, the father might be harming the child to showcase himself as a caring father.
So he was giving Blue laxatives and then taking him to the hospital himself. He is indeed seen as a caring father by others.
If it's Munchausen syndrome by proxy, it's a bit tricky. Although attitudes are changing recently, Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a mental disorder, so despite the clear abuse, it might be excused or considered a lighter offense. Since the abuse is not as obvious as physical violence, the police and child protective services might be less likely to act. But if nothing is done, your son will continue to suffer.
So, I should directly warn him and persuade him to stop?
Some people with Munchausen syndrome by proxy might not be aware of their condition. Even if you warn them, they might start abusing the child in another form or become dangerously aggressive, so it requires careful judgment. It's crucial to confirm the person's awareness, but to quickly stop the abuse, separating the father and child would be best. That's why I think divorce and having the mother take the child would be ideal, but it's problematic for a doctor to say this directly.
Having heard the doctor's words, I was convinced it was necessary to take action quickly and prepare to confront my husband. The doctor's words were the catalyst for my actions. As for my husband, he eventually realized that further arguing was futile. He put his hand on his forehead and muttered, "I don't have the energy for this anymore." His attitude suggested that even if he tried to escape the situation, the best option was to accept it as a mistake and not to continue arguing. You don't need to defend yourself. Your actions are already clear. My husband didn't say anything further. I sensed that my words had taken their toll on him. As he stared at the documents, he could only sit there, unable to muster any excuses. My actions had been thoroughly prepared, and now the next step would be dealing with the aftermath. I made a final confirmation with my husband. Hey, are you not going to turn yourself in?
Of course not.
The decision to divorce my husband was now definite. He had been abusing our son by giving him laxatives. In hindsight, it might have been better to consult the police rather than have this discussion with my husband. If I had talked to him first, he might have used his knowledge to avoid the consequences or become violent. However, despite the abuse, he was a good husband and father in many ways. Although abuse is unforgivable, there were positive aspects, and I hoped that he might change. Therefore, I considered the option of repairing our family relationship gradually without divorcing, if he reflected on his actions and changed his ways. That's why I chose to talk to him before involving the police. But it seemed my hopes were shattered. I see. Then I'll take Blue and leave.
Oh, I see. Come back soon.
Until the very end, he didn't understand the gravity of his actions. He really thought he wouldn't be arrested. I stood up from the sofa, gathered the documents and the still blank divorce papers from the table, and left for the children's room. When I entered the children's room, my son was doing his homework. However, upon seeing me, he seemed to sense something was wrong. Even at 10, while he might not understand all the details, he could sense that something serious was happening. I had him pack the things he needed for school the next day into his backpack and quickly left the house, escaping with him. A week later, my son and I returned home. My husband had been arrested and temporarily moved out of the house. During that time, my son and I moved back, and my husband rented a cheap apartment to live alone. Given the situation, he should finally understand how serious his actions were. I went to my husband's room to continue our conversation from a week ago.
You were right. I never expected to be arrested for assault.
With that much evidence, it was bound to happen. I heard you were quite panicked after being caught. When you talked to the police, you lied continuously instead of speaking honestly like you did with me, didn't you? It's truly pathetic. Why did you do such things to Blue?
When I divorced my previous wife and took Blue in, people would say, "It must be tough for a single man." You're doing great. It made me happy.
So, you started doing those things just to get more praise from others. If Blue had occasional stomach issues, it could be blamed on a weak stomach. What a way to think. Even your active involvement in household chores and parenting seems to have been about seeking praise. Why has Blue's condition worsened recently? Did you increase the amount of laxatives?
Oh, as Blue grew, the laxatives stopped working, so I gradually increased the amount. There were times when there was a gap of about 6 months, right? That was when the usual amount wasn't making Blue's stomach upset anymore. I'd increase the amount at such times. Recently, it wasn't working as well, so I might have increased it a bit too much, causing more severe stomach issues.
I was so shocked by his words that I was left speechless. It seemed he had really been harming his child just to attract attention from others.
Since it's my first offense, I'll get probation, right? I'll change my attitude from now on. So, won't you forgive me?
I would have liked to hear that a week ago. Unfortunately, it's too late now. I've brought the divorce papers, so please fill them out.
I see, I understand.
I came today to inform you of the divorce, but I'll leave the rest to the lawyer. Goodbye. My husband finally showed a serious face, reflecting on his actions. Perhaps he would no longer abuse our son. However, it was too late for that. I left him, still in Siza position, staring at the divorce papers, and went home. A few days later, I submitted the completed divorce papers from my husband. I was worried about gaining custody since my son was my ex-husband's child, but there were no issues, and I was able to take custody. As for my ex-husband, he received a probationary sentence due to it being his first offense and showing remorse. Therefore, he was not sent to prison. I asked him to move far away, as I didn't want him to see my son. While it wasn't mandatory for him to comply, he seemed to agree it was better for our son, and it seemed he had already been preparing to move even before my request. I knew where he had moved but was unaware of his daily life. Since he sends the child support payments regularly, he must be working seriously. I believe he now regrets his actions because he has become more serious. It was probably easier for him to stay carefree and not consider the weight of his actions. I have no regrets about divorcing him. I still can't forgive him for abusing our son. But while I don't regret the divorce, I now face another problem: whether to tell my son the real reason for the divorce. I had initially told him it was due to incompatibility, and 2 years had passed since then. As my son is about to enter middle school, I decided to tell him the truth.
So that's what happened. That's why my stomach got better after Dad left. Back then, my stomach hurt so much. It was really tough. Thinking about it now makes me so angry.
I had thought my son would be sad upon learning he had been abused, but he seemed to direct his anger toward his father. It seemed I had been unnecessarily worried. While it might not be ideal for him to have such negative feelings about his father, it's better than being saddened. If he ever feels hurt about his father in the future, I'll do my best to support him. However, he is so energetic now that I doubt that will be necessary. Instead, I find myself receiving strength and support from him. Not wanting to be a mother who solely relies on her child, I am preparing for his entry into middle school, striving to be a better mother. How did you find this story? Please remember to subscribe as well. See you in the next video.